The players don't want a federal mediator to interfere in the lockout. I think that's strange when you consider how outside authorities have often landed on the players' favor. Meanwhile, one deceased savior probably would not be helping the Yankees as much as you think, and I make a proposal for who could save baseball. You don't know who it is? He knows something about heroes. This is Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB. Your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please, I'm imploring with you, call me Sully. This episode is being dropped on the, say it with me, the 7th day of February 2022. And we are going to be talking about why baseball should have taken some sort of mediation, because it seems to be on their side. We're going to be talking about a savior who wasn't as much of a savior as you may have thought he was, and someone who I think very well could be a savior because he did something with something I've talked about before, but made something on the fringe super popular, beyond popular, dominating our culture. Maybe he could do that with baseball. Hey, thanks for making us your first listen. We're available on all your free podcasting platforms. I can't remember if I've already said that. Might as well say it twice. You can follow us on Locked On MLB on Twitter, same handle for Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Yeah, over the years, when baseball has turned to some sort of outside authority, outside mediator, outside arbitration, they tend to side with the players. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor was one of the key people to basically end the lockout of the 1995 spring training. When the Seitz decision came out, first in terms of the Catfish Hunter contract and then the Messersmith and McNally contracts in the mid-1970s, which led directly to free agency, they went the players' way. Usually when, owners were found guilty of collusion, whenever they've gone to an outside source, people who aren't in the insular world of baseball, it tends to go the players' way. Now, I, for one, was hoping they would. I'm a players person. I tend to side with the players on these matters. And I think the players, what they're fighting for is, I'm all for it. I'm all for making sure that there isn't a wide gap in, players who are just starting can get what they're worth, and veterans who are not, being paid the minimum can actually find a home. And I want anything to end tanking. Look at, and let me get to this, and I'm going to tie this back when we do the third segment. So maybe I'm teasing a little something in the third segment, but the idea that tanking is a smart strategy, it is if everyone could do it. Yes, you can point to situations like the Cubs or the Astros trading everything that wasn't nailed down, stinking for a couple of years, and then putting together a team that went on to win, for the Astros, win 3 pennants. Say what you want, they won those 3 pennants, and the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016. Yeah, it was great when it worked. But how long have the Pirates and the Orioles been tanking? It worked when the Nationals had a couple of bad years and they built up the team that ultimately went on to win the World Series. But were they tanking? Were they doing something? Were they rebuilding in a smart way? I'm for anything. And did I mention anything that rewards teams for trying to put a decent product on the field, for trying to put together an entertaining product? And if that means making changes, then so be it. And I'm all for that. But the main thing I'm for is playing the games. And maybe I'm taking a big picture point of view. I'm not getting into politics here, but I will say there's a lot of things in the last 5, 6, 7 years, at least in the world of politics for your pal Sully, that I'm looking at going like, wow, really? This is where we are? And you just want little small victories. Well, I want, the bar is pretty low in what will make me happy these days. And these days, the bar is relatively low in terms of my baseball fandom. I've lived through a couple of strikes. I've lived through a World Series being canceled. I've lived through scorched earth. And I actually think it would be smart for the players to take this to some form of arbitration. It would be smart for them to take it to some sort of outside party and have both sides say, hey, whatever this arbitrator says, we're going to go with. Because eventually it's going to come down to that. Eventually it's going to come down to both sides saying, okay, one of us is going to blink because we can't afford to miss a season. And I would love for the players to get everything they want. I would love also, there are things, I don't want expanded playoffs. I don't. Because that also cheapens and waters down the regular season. Why are you going to put together a team that's going to win 90 games when 83 games will do just as well? Hey, we're a playoff team. We went, 79 and 83. We're in the playoffs. Hooray! Well, if you sign this player, you make this acquisition. No, we're good. We're good. Just make the playoffs. It's a crapshoot. Yay! I don't want that. I like a baseball season that's meaningful, where good teams are going down the stretch. Baseball has its charms and has the things that makes it likable, and you got to kind of ask the fans what they like. Again, that's going to be a big part of Section 3 today of today's show. But I have a feeling if you lay down the facts, lay down the reality in front of a third party, I bet the players may not get everything they want, but I think they'll get more than not. And right now, the lockout is still something in concept and in theory. It is. I mean, yeah, the lockout is real if you're trying to buy season tickets and everything like that. But in terms of fandom, it's still this sort of ethereal thing that's happening. Well, I guess they're locked out, blah, 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 blah. So I guess my point is go see the mediation. Go to marriage counseling. Have a third party that you present your case to. I'm thinking of that scene in the movie Deliverance when after they kill the dude in the on the side of the river, and Burt Reynolds says, "You believe in democracy?" He said, "I'll stand by the vote," and he points to Ronnie Cox, says, "And so will you," when they're trying to determine what to do with the dead body in Deliverance. Spoiler alert. I think both of them should look at each other and say, whatever that arbitrator says, we're going to go with, even if it's a stay, even if it's an injunction for 2 years, and then you bang out everything else. I think that if you see how things have gone in the past, I think the players will be kind of sort of happy with what comes about. A lot of times facts are on their side and collusion and stuff like that is on the owner's side. And if you have a mediator in between, I'm just saying, I understand why the players said no. They want to negotiate in good faith. And by the way, anyone writing articles or doing podcasts or whatever, remember to phrase it correctly. The players are not extending the lockout. Owners can end the lockout before I finish this sentence I'm saying right now. They choose not to. Players strike, owners lock out. I thought that was an easy concept for people to understand. But apparently, when I see all these articles being written where they're kind of throwing it back in the players' faces, why are the players prolonging the lockout? They're not. That's it. End of the argument. That's your article. Why are the players extending the lockout? Body of the article, they are not. Boom. Send it to copy. So I want them to do it. I want them to do it because I think not only will it lead to a faster end to the lockout, but I think it will give a huge burst of energy to the baseball fandom, especially knowing that football is ending any minute now. And we can all move on with this new burst to get season tickets and a new energy, and everything will be positive. And believe me, everyone will forget the lockout because the season will have so much juice behind it and so much energy. And by the way, we're going to talk energy. Let's talk Built Bars. It's the time of the year that a lot of us have given up on our New Year's resolution, but this year, stick to them. They're easier to stick to thanks to Built Bar. You know, it feels like you're not doing your resolutions when you're eating a Built Bars. Like, oh, I'm cheating. I'm having something I shouldn't eat. No. Built Bars, they're good for you. And they're so good, it's like, wow, I can't believe this is healthy. Have you tried the Puffs? Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of the best Built Bars out there. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy. They're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're covered with 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors. Cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're so good. These are going to be your new favorites. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, that includes the Puffs. I don't want to hear about it. 100% real chocolate. Low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They're better. Typical candy bar has what? 200 or 300 calories? Go to built.com, scroll down to the macros charts. You could be blown away. High protein, low cal, high fiber, low carb. Boom, boom, boom. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar. Come on, 30 grams of sugar in that? Dozens of net carbs, and over sometimes up to 300 calories. Think of all the great flavors you get at Built Bar. Mint brownie, coconut almond, my personal favorite, raspberry. And new this month, we've got white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious. New flavors are coming out all the time. Relax. If they think of a new flavor, it's going to be good. They're going to make it. And they're all delicious. I don't know how they do it, but they do it every single time. Go to built.com. Use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. I was thinking about this the other day. It's a little insane that you have a gigantic hole in shortstop for the New York Yankees. They had Gleyber Torres there and Miguel Andujar. Miguel Andujar is kind of a player without a position right now. And they moved Gleyber Torres back to second base where he should be. And he actually wound up playing well once they shifted him back second base. And so everyone knew, Cashman said, anyone with a set of eyes saw they needed a shortstop, and who was available out there. You had Corey Seager, you had Javier Baez, you had Marcus Semien, you had Trevor Story, you had Carlos Correa. It was like going to the Willy Wonka chocolate factory, but instead of chocolate, they were making shortstops. And the Yankees have money to spend. Do you know why? They're the Yankees. And as I mentioned before, I thought they were getting Corey Seager. I thought Corey Seager was a perfect fit for the Yankees. They were going to get a postseason hero, World Series and National Championship Series MVP. Had a great swing for Yankee Stadium. He was injured for a chunk of last year, but I thought he was going to fit right in, slide right in to the infield. And I thought he was a perfect fit. He wound up going to the Rangers. So did Semien. Baez wound up going to Detroit. Okay, Trevor Story and Carlos Correa are still out there. But Houston's going to sign one of them. And the Angels are probably going to sign one of them. And eventually the musical chair is going to stop. And you're already hearing stuff like, well, if we acquire this guy from the A's, we can move Urshela over here. Why, and this is just a few years after not signing Manny Machado. I don't like him, his attitude. Shut up, you're an idiot if you say that. Machado is a spectacular talent. And he would be great in New York. He'd be fantastic. But he's signed with San Diego. Now, I do think it's surreal that the Yankees haven't opened up the purse strings. And, it's clear that Hal Steinbrenner is more interested in some of the financial elements of it than putting together the big winning club, and much to the chagrin of many Yankee fans. And, maybe this is the sort of thing that needs to be ironed out in any future collective bargaining agreement, is making it so teams are always trying to put the best product on the field. They're constantly trying to do that. It's kind of sort of the ideal, isn't it? But there is something I want to bring up. I have talked about this in prior podcasts, but it's worth bringing up when I keep hearing things like, if the boss were alive, if George were alive, then they would have signed him. George must be spitting in his grave and all this other stuff. There has been a perception that the deep pockets of George Steinbrenner have led the Yankees to multiple championships over the years, and he would just swoop in and buy all the best players, and there you go. And of course, you can look in the past, whether it was Catfish Hunter or Reggie Jackson or Rich Gossage or Dave Winfield or David Cohn or Roger Clemens, all the big stars who he swooped in and got either via free agency or via trade, where the original team is trying to pawn off the big, huge contract. Of course, there are many, Mike Mussina, A-Rod, we can keep going on and on and on. And with that perception of like, hey, the two big times that George Steinbrenner had his deep pockets were the Bronx Zoo era of the Yankees, where they went to the World Series in 76, 77, 78, and 81, winning two of those. And of course, the great run they had under Joe Torre. All right. But there's something you need to also consider before you paint the brush of Steinbrenner as this great savior whose deep pockets always led the way. Those two great eras that I just said, the foundations of those years were built when George Steinbrenner was under suspension. That's right. He got suspended twice. Once for illegal contributions to Richard Nixon's presidential campaign, and the other for paying a private investigator to try to dig up dirt on Dave Winfield. Again, not a Mad Lib, that actually happened. Both times he got suspended. With him out of the chair, first Gabe Paul in the mid-70s and Gene Michael in the early 90s. You always need someone named Gene. Put together the foundations for the team that when Steinbrenner came back, opened his wallet, put in the last few pieces, led to the title, but the foundation was already laid out and not with the hands of Steinbrenner. You also remember the times when Steinbrenner had the most power was when he pushed out all the front office people, including Gabe Paul, and he was starting to make impulsive decisions. That led to the stretch of time between the end of the 81 World Series and the 94 strike, where the Yankees made the postseason a grand total of 0 times, despite throwing money hand over fist. And when he started assuming more control after the 2001 World Series, when he said there's going to be some changes happening here, they went on a run where they've won the World Series once since 2000. Once. As many times as the Royals. As many times as the Marlins. Once. Despite throwing all the money in the world. It's the 21st century has had 2 Yankee titles. Okay, now that's better than most teams, but you would think that with the deep pockets, there would be multiple ones. And Steinbrenner, during his time, when he was in the most control, the Yankees couldn't win the World Series. Now, that's one of the reasons why I'm a bit hesitant to embrace people trying to portray George Steinbrenner as the savior who could help the Yankees right now, because that wasn't the case when it happened. It's a rewriting of history. I happen to remember going to Yankee Stadium in the early 90s, just before Steinbrenner got suspended for the Howie Spira trying to dig up dirt on Dave Winfield. Believe me, there were seats available at Yankee Stadium. And you know what the chant was? Remember this, the people who are wishing busting out the Ouija boards to bring the ghost of George Steinbrenner back to be in control of this team. The chant at Yankee Stadium was, George must go. He was hated. he was hated for the meddling that he did on the team, for trading away young players. In fact, there's another George who's worth quoting, Costanza. In the 1994 episode of Seinfeld called The Opposite, the episode where George decided to do the opposite of what he would normally do, and he found out that every time he did the opposite of what his instincts told him to do, he had great success. And that wound up leading him to an interview, a job interview with George Steinbrenner, who was voiced by Larry David. In that episode, George Costanza is introduced to George Steinbrenner, and Steinbrenner says, "Nice to meet you." And George says, and I quote, "I wish I could say the same, but I must say with all due respect, it is very hard to see the logic behind some of the moves you have made with this fine organization. In the past 20 years, you have caused myself and the city of New York a good deal of distress, as we have watched you take our beloved Yankees and reduce them to a laughingstock for all the glorification of your massive ego." Of which Steinbrenner said, "Hire this man." Now remember, one of the reasons why that scene was so funny was that's what Yankee fans were thinking. They hated him. And they saw all the things, the moves that he made that made them the worst team in baseball in the early 1990s. And the other famous Costanza-Steinbrenner scene is, of course, Frank Costanza yelling at George Steinbrenner about, how could you trade Jay Buhner? That was at the core of what Yankee fans hated so much, is that Steinbrenner would trade away all their young players for names he recognized. And so many of the players flourished in the 80s who began as Yankee farmhands. Willie McGee, Fred McGriff, Cy Young Award winner Doug Drabeck, World Series MVP Jose Rio. There's a whole slew of them. When Scott McGregor would have been a pretty good Yankee, I think, but he was traded away. Buhner was traded away. So many wonderful players were traded away from the Yankees. And that's what Steinbrenner did. So instead of thinking, if he was here, all the goodness would have been there for the Yankees. No. At the time, the narrative was George is destroying the Yankees. And I find it very, very interesting how he has gone from the destruction of the Yankees to the point where that was so well known it could be part of a Seinfeld episode, to now, from beyond the grave, he's the person that Hal should emulate. Look, it would have been the longest odds for a bet in the early 90s to think of George Steinbrenner as being some sort of savior for the Yankees. And if you're going to do any bets, go to BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs. Cincinnati and LA next week. You're going to watch it? I might. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute pro and college hoops, National Hockey League, boxing, UFC, along with live, real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing new offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, eventually, the lockout will end. Eventually, the Yankees will have a shortstop. But some of the problems that baseball has in building a fan base will still be there. And I know exactly the person they should hire. There's someone sitting out there who has achieved exactly what baseball needs to achieve, and did so with longer odds than anyone had any right to imagine were possible. Who should baseball hire? Who should Commissioner Manfred hire to basically run the sport? Manfred, if you want the title, continue the title, fine. Create a new title for this person. Executive President of Baseball, whatever. because I want this man running baseball based upon the mind-boggling success this man has had. Kevin Feige. I want Kevin Feige to run baseball. Now, I talked about this a little bit a few days ago. Kevin Feige is the producer and the man behind Marvel Studios. Yep. I want him to do to baseball what he did with Marvel movies. Now, I talked about this on an episode a couple of days ago with Lauren Campbell and Josh Neighbors, and it sounded like my tongue was in my cheek. It's not. And there's no part of me is being sarcastic right now. I want them to show up at his house with a gigantic dump truck full of money and say, name your price. Because if he can do with baseball what he did with Marvel, there will be so much money for everybody that the one thing that will be the one common problem will be, oh my God, what are we going to do? Where can we shove all these millions of dollars? I only have so many offshore bank accounts. What did he do? In review, Marvel had many properties that they wanted to sell off to film companies and make movies with them. And they sold off their three most popular groups of characters: Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men. When they decided to make movies on their own, they basically had the bench. And think really long and hard about this. Let's go back to 2007. 2007, if you weren't a big comic book fan, did you know who Iron Man was? Maybe you have a vague memory of it. Do you know who Captain America was? Maybe you had a vague memory. This is if you're not in the comic book world, these were kind of like talking about Ramiro Mendoza. You know, this is talking about, Jeremy Affeldt. That's what freaking Captain America was. If you're a baseball fan, you know who those names are. If you're a comic book fan, you know who those characters were. But if you're not, you have a vague memory. We don't really know who they are. And Feige came in, along with Jon Favreau, whatever it is. They started looking at their bench. And so, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to turn these into big, huge hits? Now, remember, up until that point, if you want to make a successful superhero movie, you needed two things. You needed a superhero that everybody knew: Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. Everyone knew them. And you usually needed to attach a gigantic movie star to it. Marlon Brando in the Superman movies, Jack Nicholson in Batman. And even then, they would tinker with it. Oh, we got, this is a niche thing. Comic books are a niche thing. We got to make sure it appeals to everybody. We'll put Prince music in the Batman film and change around some stuff. Who cares, what comic book fans want? Spider-Man didn't have the big, huge stars. They had a bunch of respectable actors. But it kind of opened up like, oh, we don't need a big star. The star is the character. But even then, everyone knows who Spider-Man was. When you saw Spider-Man, got it, know it. Even X-Men, who were not quite as famous, but people knew who X-Men were. People knew Fantastic Four, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Think about some of the characters who are now so massively popular that they're just ingrained in our pop culture. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, freaking Ant-Man, the Guardians of the freaking Galaxy, Black Panther. I mean, how many of you knew what Black Panther was just a few years ago? None of you knew who Guardians of the Galaxy were. And this guy figured it out. This guy figured out how to do it without changing it so much that the comic book fans were angry. In fact, tapped in to that collective sense of let's please the biggest fans first, get that fan base into a frenzy, and everyone else would want to be a part of that. He figured out how to do that. He figured it out. And you know what? The formula is not as easy as you think. All the other studios are seeing that. And other producers coming in and said, we'll do the same with Star Wars. They've had some success with the new Star Wars, some huge failures. And they never quite, there's all sorts of weird directions going in. You know? And in fact, the last couple of Star Wars films felt more like Marvel films. DC has much more famous superheroes: Superman, Batman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. And they can't get their act together. They keep tripping over themselves. You know, Paramount has Star Trek, and they can't figure out what the heck they're doing. Some things work, some things don't. But everything Marvel does, the fact that the Eternals comes out, who knows what the Eternals are? And they're doing it with, franchises that aren't instantly recognizable, and they're doing it without big, huge movie stars. Robert Downey Jr. was well known, and people like him as Iron Man, but it wasn't like people were lining up to see the next Robert Downey Jr. movie. They found a bunch of handsome dudes named Chris Evans, Hemsworth, Pratt. Chris Pratt was the chubby guy from freaking Parks and Rec. They say, hey, quit eating carbs. We're going to make you a superhero. They figured it out. And now the entire culture, they figured out how to do it right. The people making the Star Wars films couldn't get it right with Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, and the Marvel people turned WandaVision into a huge sensation. Why am I talking about this? I'm not even a big comic book fan. Because they figured out how to make something not based upon whether it's big market, like Spider-Man, Batman, Yankees, Red Sox, not based upon big superstars, like the biggest baseball stars. You don't all have to be lined up with who's on the Cubs, who's on the Mets, who's on the Dodgers. Doesn't have to be a star in a Spider-Man costume. Doesn't have to be a star in a freaking Captain America costume. That they got people to just show up in droves. The only blockbuster we've had this year, with all the other variants and everything, people staying at home. The one film people went out to see is the Spider-Man film they just did, which is the seventh Spider-Man movie. This guy knows how to do it. He's figured it out. And he did it with intellectual properties that were a lot less well known than Major League Baseball teams. Iron Man is now considered to be an iconic superhero on the level of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Spider-Man. That was not the case in 2008. Was not the case. Now, give him Mike Trout and the Angels. Give him this world champion Braves team. Give him the Rays. Give him the Giants. Have him figure out a couple of things, that you stay with what the fan base wants. Because as I said when I was making the Wordle comparison a couple of days ago, we are all thirsty. Every meaning of the word thirsty, including the current slang. Mom, you won't understand what that means. To have collective experiences in the wake of this COVID disaster. To have things that unite us in happiness. Look what's going on with the Olympics right now. When the Olympics works best, people will follow the most obscure damn sports if they feel an emotional connection to them. Feige would understand this. Feige would understand how to tap in to that collective love for the game, follow what the fans want, the diehard fans, instead of watering the product down and trying to spread it out thin, to make the core fans happy and make the core fans so excited that it becomes magnetic and people are drawn to it. And it's harder than it looks. Warner Brothers had a movie with Superman, Batman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. And it was boring. Yet the Marvel world could have, like Infinity War and Endgame, which were the equivalent of the Death Star battle for this generation. I want that mind working on baseball. If he could turn Black Panther and Ant-Man into cultural phenomena, WandaVision into must-see television, and have Tony Stark's fate in the Avengers Endgame be something that is a generational moment of a gasp in the audience. Imagine what he can do with the Cubs and the Red Sox, or beyond that, with the Cleveland Guardians and the Baltimore Orioles and the Pittsburgh Pirates and the teams that don't need a boost. Imagine what he could do with turning the teams that aren't the go-to play, teams in the postseason. Whenever you hear the World Series isn't involving the Red Sox, Cubs, Yankees, or Dodgers, there's a collective, oh God, how could baseball market it? Go, let's turn to the guy who made Black Panther and freaking Iron Man a sensation. I'm not kidding. Come up to Feige. Say, here's a check. It's made out to you. Fill in the numbers. Run our league. And guess what? It may not happen overnight, but it will turn into what we want it to be. What we fans want, which is baseball. The things we love about baseball. We love the daily part of baseball. We love that the regular season means something. We love that there's a connection to the past, but we're not linked to it constantly. It has to have a timeless feeling. The past, present, and future are happening simultaneously. You can't ignore the future. You can't ignore the present. You can't ignore the past. They're all there. Make it something that the fan bases would love. And then watch that fan base grow. You don't believe me? Go back in time. See how many people were wearing Captain America costumes in 2007. Thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen. Why not make your second listen be Locked On Bets with your boy Q and Locked In analysis from Lee Sterling. I may have gone long today, but you know what? I had a lot to say. Talking about what baseball should do in terms of mediation, dispelling the notion of Steinbrenner as a savior, and telling baseball who they should hire to be their real hero. This has been Locked On MLB for the 7th day of February, 2022. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.